Think we're live? I never know with Restream because I feel like there's a bit of a delay. But anyway, I think we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode from myself and Mark, Vegan Education in Adelaide, Australia. It's a nice Saturday morning over here, so I hope wherever you are watching this that you're having a good day or evening. Today's topic is about zoos. So should be kind of an interesting one. Before we get into it, we will. Who's this episode dedicated to, Mark?
I'll just quickly share my screen. There we go. So this is Bo from Freedom Hill Sanctuary.
Oh,
So
Bo.
not our photo, but yeah, this was posted a couple of days ago from Freedom Hill Sanctuary, enjoying the nice sunset, which is good.
Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful sunset there that Bo gets to enjoy. Is there a bit of a backstory for Bo, or it's just Bo?
The caption just says, "Grateful for moments like these that remind us of life's simple joys."
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Okay. Well, this episode is dedicated to Bo, who is now living a life of peace at Freedom Hill and will never be ridden again, not have someone on her back. Will never have to wear a saddle or, bit or anything like that. Never be forced to race or anything like that, or do tricks for people's entertainment. So that's nice for Bo. Thanks, Mark.
Cool.
All right, well, let's jump into it. So the topic today, zoos. Oh, wait, before that, you did a little bit of activism yesterday. Were there any things you wanted to share from that?
Yeah. I didn't talk to that many people. It was pretty quiet. One guy I talked to is kind of weird. He agreed with everything and was on board. So I'm assuming he's vegan now. It's kind of weird. Like, I think you can attest to this, but my personality when I come into new information is to like try and poke holes in it and test whether it's like viable or true. And I can come across as a little bit argumentative. So it was kind of weird someone agreeing with you just straight off the bat and not having any disagreements. It was kind of felt really weird. Like, do they actually know understand the gravity of this? Like, if you actually agree with this? So yeah, that was kind of interesting.
That would have been an interesting discussion. So they were not vegan, but they pretty much were agreeing with everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did ask them questions and things. It wasn't just me like talking their ear off. They're like, "That's a good point" and stuff. And I asked them like, "Is it possible to respect someone and use them?" And they said no. So I guess they're vegan now. They've got my card if they need to get into contact. But,
yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah, you planted a seed and they obviously wanted to stop and talk about it, so they're kind of interested. And yeah, who knows? Maybe they will live a vegan life.
Yeah, and I really tried to focus on the fact, like educating people about what veganism is. I think that's important. Like even if he doesn't go vegan, just having a clear understanding that I essentially said like veganism is like the anti-slavery movement, but for animals.
Okay.
So it's kind of like very rights based, and yeah, I guess if you are not vegan, then it kind of forces you to take the stance that you're for animal slavery. I think that's an important thing to like almost force people to take a stand one way or another.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the last guy I spoke to was very interesting. I'm sure you can clinically diagnose him after this podcast. We can probably talk more about him. But he's, I quote, saved the world more times than you can imagine. So he was talking about like angels and demons and monsters under the ocean and all this stuff. So that was very good practice to realize that the conversation was going nowhere. And he wanted to talk about his stuff more than he wanted to listen. So it was just good practice to be like, okay, well, like, have a great day. Good luck with everything, and kind of
Yeah.
practice that moving him on, because you kind of can get stuck in those conversations and it takes a lot of time away from other possible conversations that are going to be more fruitful.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And yeah, I've experienced that even sometimes like in therapy with people, if they're kind of in like that state where, you know, maybe there are some kind of delusions going on, and they kind of almost can be quite obsessive about it. It's hard to kind of bring them back to anything solid, like bring them back to, you know, reality, or even just keep them on topic.
Yeah.
Some
And
people
then when you
are
try and
very,
bring it back to topic, he's like, hang on, I'm trying to teach you something. It's like, hang on, like, you're the one who stopped and wanted information from me. Like, I didn't ask to be preached to about the aliens under the ocean and stuff.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, that was subpar, but
it happens. It's
at
all right.
least he gave me a handshake at the end, and I guess the progress that I made was he was saying, like, you have to eat meat to survive and stuff like that. And then by the end, he was like, "Oh, you look like a strong lad and stuff, and like, good luck." Like, so I still had that rapport, and at least he doesn't think we're crazy vegans. We are
Yeah, well,
crazy, but at least he doesn't think that.
well, now also, I guess maybe he doesn't think you need to eat meat to survive anymore. Like, yeah, I mean, I hope when people have that attitude, I hope that like meeting a vegan who, you know, like when we um, tell people how long we've been vegan for as well, like for
Yeah,
me, over a decade, and, you know, like I hope that meeting a vegan changes that belief for them. Like, I hope that people who think you need to eat meat to survive,
mm.
you know, I hope that when they talk to us and we tell them how long we've been vegan for, that maybe that belief changes a little bit at least.
Yeah. It's a bit calling them out on their belief. It's like presenting them with alternative evidence, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, cool. All right, good. Thanks for sharing. So, zoos, let's get on to this. So, this is a topic that can be contentious in the vegan realm, but that I strongly believe shouldn't be at all. But, you know, we'll talk a bit about that, I suppose. And it was funny because Mark creates the like video titles, our episode like titles and thumbnails and everything. And he originally was going to title it something like zoos, like are they ethical or not? Like I can't remember. It was something along those lines. And I was like, nah, I don't want it to be a question. Like I don't want to phrase it as a question. Like I don't want to give any kind of like hint or like leeway that it could possibly like be ethical. So I asked him to rename it to zoos and vegan ethics, because like I don't even want there to like be any contention around this issue with vegans, but there
mm.
is nonetheless. So anyway, we can talk about it a bit. So did you have like specific points written down, Mark, to kind of lead our discussion today, or is it
Got
just go?
about a whole page of questions and thoughts, but they're a
Okay.
bit of a shambles. But I guess we can start with, like, what is a zoo, or like, how do you define a zoo personally?
Yeah, and what a lot of zoos actually do. I mean, my understanding is like there's different types. So you've got, my understanding is that a zoo is a place that has like lots of different animals from different parts of the world. And, you know, they could potentially have any animal in there, right? So it's not just like a conservation, what's it called? Wildlife park. Like it's not just like a place that only has like native wildlife, right? They
Yeah.
usually zoos have like exotic animals or like, you know, non-native foreign animals as well as maybe native animals. So they basically just can have any animal in a zoo. And I think like, and this is maybe part of like the argument people make for zoos is that a lot of people say that they like zoos commonly run kind of conservation programs or, you know, they are part of kind of a conservation scheme. And some of them even do like breeding. So part of that conservation, they do like the breeding of animals to, I guess, increase populations. And I assume in some cases it might be a breed and release program. For example, I'm pretty sure Adelaide Zoo, where we live, I'm pretty sure they do a breed and release program with some of the native animals, like potentially like bilbies and some of the small like marsupials and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, generally, so zoos can have different components to them, I suppose. They have breeding programs, they have conservation programs, but I think the key part of a zoo and what separates them from like conservation parks and stuff is that they also have a large component that's purely for entertainment. You know, they've got all these animals locked up there that maybe are not even endangered, like their species is not endangered. And like it's purely just for people's entertainment, to be able to see different animals. So I think that's what separates a zoo from like a conservation or wildlife park. What do you think about that? Is that your
Yeah.
understanding too?
You've commented on like 50% of my notes, so this is good so far. Well, this is just the definition of a zoo, just when you type it in Google. An establishment which maintains a collection of wild animals, typically in a park or garden, for study, conservation, or display to the public. So,
Interesting how it says a collection of wild animals, like that, but they're not wild because they're in a zoo, you know.
yeah, I mean,
And a
they
lot of them
use,
weren't even taken from the wild. A lot of them were bred in zoos and then transported to other zoos. That's another huge part of zoos as well, is transporting animals from zoo to zoo.
yeah.
Mm.
Okay, well, there's the
But
next
yeah,
half
I
of
don't.
my
Yeah,
notes gone. I had that to talk about as well.
we can
But
still
yeah,
talk
like,
about it in more detail. I'm just giving an
yeah.
overview of what a zoo does.
At least we're on the same page, which is good. Um,
Yeah, interesting that they say collection of wild animals. It's like, not really, but yeah.
yeah, that's like the thing. Like, what animal isn't wild? Like, you have to start with wild animals and then catch them or breed them, and then they're not wild anymore.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, like, I definitely, yeah. So a zoo, I guess, would probably cover most of these things, like studying animals, displaying animals, and then also, as you said, the conservation stuff. um, which they, they're kind of the claims of what zoos intend to do. Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack. As I said, I think the controversy, like, I would assume that most vegans would be against, um, like, using animals purely for entertainment. So, for the animals that are in the zoo that are, um, like I said, not endangered, they're not part of like a breeding program, like there's no kind of conservation element to it at all. It's purely just this animal is there to be on display. So I'm trying to think of like an example of some animals that aren't.
Well, there's so many, like kangaroos.
Yeah,
Like they're
kangaroos.
literally culling kangaroos in Australia because there's, quote, too many kangaroos, and yet we have kangaroos in the zoo. So
Yeah, yeah,
is that part of conservation? I don't think so. Is that
no,
part of display to the public? Yes.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's a good example. But there might even be some other animals like maybe monkeys or I'm sure there's a lot, snakes, different
Birds,
reptiles, birds, like
chickens. I think
spiders.
there's chickens at Adelaide Zoo maybe that you can hold, and
Yeah,
goats.
there's a
There's like a
petting.
petting zoo.
Yeah, there's a petting zoo component as well. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of animals in there that there is no conservation element there. They're purely being used for entertainment. So I would hope that anyone who calls themselves a vegan would agree that using an animal purely for entertainment, keeping them in captivity purely for entertainment is completely wrong and immoral and not in line with the vegan kind of ethic.
Mm.
So that's hopefully black and white for most vegans. But then there's the other component, which is I've seen vegans argue that, or people who call themselves vegan argue that the conservation element of zoos justifies it. And,
Mm.
they're so worried that if we didn't have zoos, that, you know, animals would be more likely to go extinct and, we wouldn't see, because of poaching and things like that for different animals or loss of habitat, that zoos are kind of the only thing like tethering them to this earth, and that they might go extinct if we didn't have zoos.
Mm.
So I guess we can discuss our thoughts about that.
Yeah, I guess you kind of have to concede like zoos do good things in terms of conservation, but it doesn't justify using other animals to raise funds for that or using other animals to meet those goals. Like you fall into kind of a utilitarian framework, right? Where, if we catch these kangaroos and keep them in captivity, we can raise money for a
Panda breeding program.
panda, like in
Yeah.
another country. Like it's just a purely, yeah, we're just using some species of animals or some individuals to help other animals, and that's not vegan.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the ethics of the conservation in a sec. But so what you're saying is, even if, it was justified for zoos to kind of have these conservation programs and these animals, endangered animals in captivity, that it doesn't justify them like keeping captive all these other animals that aren't endangered or aren't part of like a conservation program. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think people, they desperately, desperately want someone or some organization to be doing these conservation efforts. So they think that zoos are good or justified because they do some good things. Like, admittedly, donating money to help, maybe protect an area of the environment from deforestation or whatever. Like, I don't know what other programs zoos do, but that admittedly is a good thing, I think, for the environment to help protect the environment. But how they're going about that is horrendous. Like, it's just not justifiable.
Yeah, I agree. I guess that's one reason not to support zoos is that,
Yeah.
the other stuff they do, the other animals they keep in captivity purely for entertainment is not justified for,
Yeah.
conservation purpose, like, for
Yeah.
funding conservation purpose.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, we make all these calculations to try and justify it, right? Like, oh, if we just enslave or put into captive these X amount of animals, we can do X amount of good. We try and juggle all these calculations of well-being and suffering and protection and things. But yeah, like that's just not vegan. Like using
Mhm.
someone as a means to your own end is just not vegan.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah. Um, but then there's the issues with the conservation element too. So, I mean, my thoughts on this at the moment are that it's not like I definitely support the idea of conservation. I think we need
Yeah.
to try and conserve the Earth's natural habitats and natural resources and, biodiversity, which includes, all sorts of, species of animals and everything. But I, again, taking the same view that I do with human beings, I don't think that we can do that, like conservation, at the cost of like sacrificing individuals and their lives. So whilst, if you've got, an elephant or two elephants in a zoo that are part of a breeding program, so they're in the zoo and the zoo's hoping to breed them, that they have a elephant cub, I think it might be, or elephant calf.
Calf, yeah.
And then, they're kind of contributing to conservation by keeping this species alive, even if they're in captivity. It's like you're kind of sacrificing the autonomy, the freedom, the well-being, the mental health of those elephants for like the greater good. And that's just not fair to those individuals. Like if you think of, like, I think people think of endangered species, or like they often think about animals like as a species,
Yeah, it's this
not
like,
as individuals.
yeah.
And I think that that's not fair, like to forfeit the rights of, these individual beings for sake of what we've determined to be like the greater good and what we think to be worth it. I don't think that's fair to those individuals. Like those elephants as individual beings are suffering
Yeah.
and being held in captivity. And even if, the enclosures are, I mean, maybe we can have a discussion about enclosures in a minute, but, it doesn't matter how you try to take care of them, you're impeding on their rights to freedom. They're still in captivity. They're still, being dependent on the zookeepers to, look after them and stuff like that. Like they're not free. So I think of it from an individual perspective. I don't think individual animals should be kept in captivity and, breeding and stuff like that just for the sake of, what we've determined to be the greater good, because we wouldn't do that to humans, I don't think. I mean, I'm not sure really if humans were endangered what people would do, but
Well, we don't test on humans, like unconsenting human testing, because we don't see it as just a species. It's not like one body, kind of like hive mind, It's like we are made up of individuals that have rights. And we realized that a long time ago that that was a better way to live. And we just need to extend that to animals. I like how you said we see animals as groups of species, and it's like a hive mind. Like we imagine or like trick ourselves into imagining that elephant is like sacrificing themselves consentingly for the good of their own species or something.
yeah.
So they don't give a
And
shit. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing as well. This is the whole issue in all animal exploitation. It's like animals just don't have, like, they don't have the capacity to be able to give consent, or we don't have the capacity to be able to get consent from them. And so we can't assume what they would be thinking or what they would do if they could communicate, effectively enough with us to give consent. So I guess any way that we use animals is always pretty much always unconsenting.
well, it
And
is.
so, yeah, we have to be very careful, about that, and about the assumptions we make about what animals might be thinking or what they might want and that kind of thing. I even kind of hate it when, this is a bit sidetracked, but I even kind of hate it when vegans, even if it's like pro veganism, like if they make assumptions about animals, like, oh, if the animals could talk, like, they would want, like, when vegans kind of use it to like justify maybe more extreme forms of like activism and stuff. Like, oh well, if the animals could talk, they would want us to do this. It's like, okay, like let's not assume we know what they would say because we just don't. But anyway, so yeah, that's my view about zoo. Like I personally do not support any kind of zoo, whether they have a conservation component or not. Um, I I don't like the idea that these animals are in captivity against their will and unconsentingly, no matter what purpose we think that it has. And what do you think about it?
Yeah, they don't change their attitude towards animals. Like the attitude remains the same that we can use animals either to for our own benefit or this is my gripe is the benefit of the environment. It's like we're not trying to protect the environment for animals' sake. I think we're trying to protect the environment for our own sake. So I think it's still protecting animals for our own sake. Like it's still
Mm.
always in our best interest,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah, it's. I just had a thought as well. This is kind of like a weird thought, but it's like, let's just say that most humans kind of did agree that it was ethical to keep animals in captivity for conservation and breeding purposes. Um, but if that was the sole reason, and if we otherwise all kind of like hated the idea that we had to do that, like if it was like a necessary evil,
Yeah,
but
like a true dichotomy kind of thing.
yeah, like if we decided that it really was necessary, but we hated the idea that that was necessary,
Mm.
then zoos wouldn't be open to the public. Like no one would want to go there and like look at these animals suffer. Like that would be fucking
Yeah,
sad. Like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like even if we decided it was completely necessary, it would still be such a sad thing. Like zoos wouldn't be open to the public. No one would want to go there and see these elephants that need to be there for conservation reasons. No one would want to go there and see them like
Mm. It's like going to
in
a prison.
captivity.
We don't have like people going to
Yeah,
prison to be like, oh, look at these people that have to be here. Like we really
yeah.
hate that
Have
they're here. It's like,
zoos
well,
are 100%
yeah,
like a prison on display for everyone to go and like gawk at these animals. Like it's so fucking sad. Like
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
It's crazy.
but yeah, but I don't think animals should be kept in zoos for the sake of conservation. I guess that leads to questions about, well, okay, so then if we don't um, have zoos even for conservation purposes, then would animals go extinct? Would certain species go extinct? I mean, it's possible that they would. And yeah, animals are going extinct every day. Really, it's happening. It's been happening a long time. We're kind of just grasping at straws, really, trying to hold on to some of these, um, you know, really endangered species of animals. Um, so then it kind of becomes a question of like, well, is it worth it though? Like, is that just what has to happen? Like, we've decimated habitat. We've caused a lot of extinctions, and like humans are driving a lot of the extinction of animals on Earth. So it's like it's kind of our fault. Why should these animals, individuals being kept in zoos, have to suffer because of like the shit we've done?
Mm.
Um, and do we just deal with the consequences of our actions that these animals have kind of gone extinct? Like, we just kind of like, if that happens, then that happens, like, and yeah, it's our fault, and yeah, it's like sad and horrible, but it's not worth sacrificing these individuals, locking them up when they've done nothing wrong, just because we've decimated the habitat and driven extinction. Mm.
Yeah, it's really not like the attitude to protect the environment as well. I don't think is as strong as because we have zoos. Zoos are
Mm.
kind of this like lifeline that we have, this like final barrier of protection. Like, even if the wild is decimated and there's no animals left, well, at least they're surviving in the zoo, that kind of thing. Whereas if we didn't have zoos, I think there would be more pressing issue. Like, instead of spending money on zoos and visitor centers and stuff, which our government has, and like we're paying to keep pandas in Adelaide, like paying
Yeah.
another zoo to keep pandas in Adelaide to make money so that people can come to the zoo. It's like, if we didn't have a zoo, we'd probably prioritize more like the environmental protection and
Yeah,
make like like protected reserves and things like that, rather
I
than
think so too.
relying on this safety net of a zoo to be like, oh, they can never go extinct because look, we have one in this box over here.
Exactly. No, I agree. I think if humans actually cared about animals as individuals and not just as a species, then the attitude would probably be more like, oh, well, like we can't keep them in zoos, we can't lock them up. So we've got to, try really hard to do other forms of conservation. And that's
Hmm.
the thing, there are other forms of conservation we could be doing. There's protecting the natural habitat, putting efforts and money and resources into that, figuring out. Yeah, I think you're right. If zoos weren't an option, if we respected animals enough to like know that zoos weren't an option, we would be scrambling to do as much other stuff as we could in other forms of conservation, protecting habitat, anti-poaching, things like that. There'd be a lot more stuff in place, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, we really have to change our relationship to animals because, yeah, like, why are poachers poaching animals? Because they're not vegan. Like,
And because
like
there's
we
a
got to get,
demand, and because there's a demand for the products of the poaching because
yeah,
people aren't vegan.
exactly. And it's like, I think also to think that it's just like these other countries that are doing it. Like, America is the second largest importer of like illegally acquired animal parts and poaching stuff, like
Yeah, really.
it's,
Wow.
and like, come on guys, just go vegan. Like, that's what we need to change. We need to
Mm,
change people's attitudes. Like, if that stopped, then we wouldn't have as many poachers, and we'd be able to protect the species at the like fundamental level. Whereas, as you said, like, if we're allowing people to kill animals but then trying to save them at the same time, it's just not working.
yeah. Some people argue that zoos help people to care about animals more. So some
Ha!
people argue that
Hilarious.
like, you take your kids to the zoo, the kids see the animals, they develop more of a connection. Like when the animals are there real in front of them, they it becomes more, of a connection in their mind rather than this abstract, seeing pictures of tigers in storybooks or something, So a lot of people argue that seeing the animals in a zoo helps people to develop that connection and care about the animals more. And so I have seen vegans say this as well, and they say that kind of like justifies it because if we didn't have zoos, people wouldn't care as much about animals and that kind of thing. It sounds weird saying it out loud.
I think it's such bullshit.
It's like, yeah, but yeah, what do you think about that?
It's bullshit because you go into a zoo with the context of society, right? Like, as you said, like, it's not a bad thing that the animals are in the zoo. So when kids go there, they're seeing the animals in a quote unquote good environment. Like, it's not this like horrible necessary evil that kids are like traumatized from. Like, oh my goodness, like, I can't believe this tiger is stuck in this cage for their entire life, and their children and their children's children are going to be stuck in this cage. No, it's like, oh, look at the cute tiger.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
let's go to the next animal. Oh, look at
yeah,
the cute rhino. Okay, let's go to the next. Like, kids don't give a
yeah,
shit. They don't know because they're just being taught what the normative society view is, and the normative society view is it's good that they're there.
yeah, yeah. I agree.
Not a lot of
When
shit.
I think adults or children really that go to a zoo, I think it is very much just like moving on, like going to one enclosure, seeing the tiger there for like less than a
30
minute,
seconds.
probably moving on to the next thing. Oh, look at the pandas, watching them for maybe 5 minutes and then moving on. Um, and it's just like in their minds, it's a couple minutes.
Hmm.
But, I mean, you said something about this, I think, like about, did you say this to the kids at the school or something about like if they stood there and watched for longer than a minute or something? What were you
Yeah.
saying to me? Yeah.
Yeah. So anytime our school does like a zoo visit, obviously I don't go. Um, and then I kind of say to the kids, like, if you choose to go, like, look at the animals for more than a minute. Like, stand there and just look at them for more than a minute and notice like their behavior and their environment and everything. And just like, yeah, notice what's going on. Because, yeah, I remember maybe a couple of years before I was vegan, um, like going to the zoo and seeing the monkeys, and they were swinging around like this giant tree. They were kind of like swinging around, and it looked like heaps of fun. I was like, okay, cool. Like the monkeys are swinging around, having fun. But then when you like stand there and just watch them for like a couple of minutes, you realize they're just okay. They're swinging around the tree again and again and again and again. And it's just like, well, yeah. What else are they going to do? You know, like if you
Mm,
just stayed for like 10 seconds, 30 seconds, you'd be like, oh, cool. The monkeys look like they're having fun. But when
yeah.
you stay there for a little bit longer, you realize that tree is their entire life.
Yeah. Or like, I still remember, obviously, I haven't been to the zoo in many years, but in my pre vegan days, as a kid, like going to the zoo, I remember, it's like the tigers and the lions, especially, were in kind of like not like in kind of concrete, like most of their enclosure was like concrete or something. Um, and I remember like, um, you see them walking around. It's kind of like, oh, yeah, there's a tiger just kind of walking around. But then if you do kind of watch them a little bit longer, yeah, like you said with the monkeys, they're kind of retracing their steps, and then you realize, oh, actually, they're not just walking around, like they're pacing.
Yeah.
They're pacing up and down their enclosure,
They've
and
literally got nowhere to go.
it's actual, like it's just horrifying, to me to think that those poor animals being trapped and
Mm.
like pacing, like, oh, it's
But
absolutely
aren't they sacrificing their freedom to help their collective species?
mm, yeah.
Wouldn't
So
you love to do
yeah, so yeah, I guess, if if it's not clear to people watching this, I don't believe that zoos are in line with a vegan ethic, and I don't think that vegans should go to zoos. And unfortunately is still, a topic of contention amongst vegans, like in the Facebook vegan groups that, we're a part of, our local vegan groups, vegans in Australia, that kind of thing. It's not uncommon to see people posting in there things like, oh, um, you know, um, I don't know, for whatever reason they've been invited to like go to the zoo, maybe part of their like kids' school excursion, or I don't know, something, or their friends have invited them to the zoo or something. And or maybe they just are thinking about taking their own kids to the zoo as a thing to do on the weekend. And so sometimes people post in that group and they're like, oh, it's almost like they know that something's not quite right. So
that?
they're
Yeah.
posting and they're asking, oh, like,
Permission. They're asking permission.
yeah, it's almost, yeah, and that's the thing. It's not even that they're asking like, is this ethical? Like sometimes they're even asking like, you know, uh, yeah, like, oh, I was gonna go. Like, what do you guys think? Or I don't know. Like, it's, yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird. But I guess they are kind of asking if it's ethical. But yeah, there's a lot of vegans that still kind of question like,
Yeah.
a zoo's okay. And then in the comments, you often see people justifying it and saying that it's fine and that it's good to support zoos. And I remember, I think it was in Vegans in Australia, I it was a while ago, so I don't remember the details clearly, but there was a guy that I was kind of having a bit of a conversation with on there online, because he was saying that he's like a monthly donor to the zoo. Like he donates to the zoo every month, because I think, he thinks that they're doing a good thing, like the conservation part of it and stuff. And yeah, I was kind of intrigued by that. I thought a vegan donating to the zoo like once a month, like surely there are other more ethical things you could donate to support conservation, that kind of thing. Like why a zoo? Like I don't know. It's weird to me.
Yeah.
I don't think vegans should support zoos. At the end of the day, it's keeping animals in captivity against their will without their consent, and that needs to be taken very seriously. And like you said before, we don't do that to humans. I know humans aren't, endangered or anything, but like in other kind of analogies, like analogous situations where sacrificing the rights of an individual human being might help a lot of others. For example, if we, used people for experiments, scientific experiments or medical testing, or, using someone's organs to, save other people. Like, we just wouldn't do that because we realize that for humans, it's like consent is very, very important, and it's not okay for others to decide to sacrifice the rights of one person to help others on the whole. So
Yeah.
I think zoos are very speciesist in that regard as well. Like, why do we think it's okay to do that to animals? Why do we think
Mm.
it's okay to, infringe on their rights as individuals when we
Yeah.
wouldn't do that with humans? Um, yeah. So that's my views on zoos. I think as a vegan, if you're a vegan that cares about conservation, um, look into other ways to go about it. I'm sure there are better ways, better things to do with your money, to support conservation, than zoos. Um, there was something else I was going to say about it before. Didn't write it down though. It's kind of left my brain. But what was it?
But yeah, if in case anybody missed it, vegans don't use animals.
Yeah.
The end, like that, like you don't really need to say much more.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you find yourself in a situation where you're using an animal, prob's not vegan.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah, it's exploitation. Exploitation is exploitation at the end of the day. Zoos are exploiting animals
Hmm.
for whatever their ends are, for whatever, as a means to it, for whatever end.
Yeah.
But, there is definitely a part of it that is purely entertainment anyway.
Yeah.
And I think that fact in itself is enough reason for vegans not to support zoos, you know. Yeah, it's just not right. It's not right to use animals for entertainment.
Yeah. I remember commenting on like a zoo post or something, just saying like, does everybody realize that like those I think those tigers or something. I was like, does everybody realize these tigers are not rescue tigers? Like their parents and their grandparents and their great grandparents have been in captivity for their entire lives. Like
Mm,
they're not going to be released into the wild. Like, why is everybody so cool with this? It's kind of weird. Like, I don't know, maybe people have tricked themselves into thinking that the animals in the zoo get released or something, or like they're there for a good reason, you know?
mm,
It's kind of
yeah,
weird. Like, yeah, if you just do like a little bit of research, like the current animals in the zoo, most of their parents were born in the zoo.
yeah,
Like, it's
yeah.
not like they've been rescued from the wild out of this like horrible situation. Because people always say that, like, oh, being in the zoo is better than being in the wild. It's like,
Mm,
but they didn't have the wild option either. Like, They just
Yeah.
wouldn't have existed.
I also kind of wonder, like, what does that look like in the long term? Like, so let's just say we suck at conserving species in the wild. So let's just say, I mean, I guess it's probably already happened with some species, but like, I think, is there a rhino? There's a species of rhino that's gone extinct in the wild, but still there's still some in zoos. It's kind of like, what happens then? Like, to what end are we keeping these rhinos in captivity in zoos when they're extinct in the wild? Why are we, like, what's the point? What's
Yeah,
the sake of like? And I guess maybe, like, the only way that it would be beneficial from a conservation perspective is if they eventually could be like repopulated back in the
mm,
wild, because there's no point keeping them in zoos. That's not really conservation. The whole point is biodiversity, right? And um, because of ecosystems that have evolved over millions of years, like a rhino would play a certain part in that ecosystem. So that's why they're important from a conservation point of view, because every species plays a role in the ecosystem that they evolved in. So if they're not if they're not in the wild anymore, they're just in a zoo for the sake of like conservation. It's like, that's not really, what's the point of that? I guess,
yeah,
yeah, I guess the only point would be if they were trying to repopulate them in the wild. But is there evidence for that? Does that happen? Probably, it probably has happened actually with, don't know about rhinos, but probably some other species. But yeah, I do just kind of wonder, really, on the whole,
mm.
how successful and how much is it actually doing, like keeping these animals in zoos for
Well,
conservation.
yeah. I just did a little bit of research on tigers because there's tigers at Adelaide Zoo, but they've had success with like protecting their natural habitat and stuff, and the tiger numbers have gone up in this particular area. But I looked up how many tigers have been bred in captivity and rewilded. Zero, big fat zero. Like
Yeah,
there's just
right.
like they just can't do it. So it's
Yeah,
like we're just perpetually. I call it generational captivity,
yeah, yeah.
like generational imprisonment. Like, sorry, tigers, like your kids, your great grandkids are going to be suffering the same fate as you in zoos for the rest of eternity.
Yeah, they're not being, yeah, there's a lot of species that, yeah, that they're not being released.
Mm.
Yeah.
And they're just
Mm.
like, yeah, living ornaments.
Yeah, exactly. It's just for the sake of like having the gene pool or whatever. Like, it's just for the sake of having the
Mm.
animal species still here on Earth. But yeah, I do really question how, in the long run, from a conservation point of view, how successful that really is anyway, the zoo programs. But
Yeah. But unless our
yeah.
attitudes change, we'll run into the same problems over and over and over again unless we actually protect the environment, like, and protect the individuals, like see them
Mm,
as individuals. Nothing's
mm,
gonna change. I also think
yeah.
it's on
I,
like a maybe a more complicated note. Um, it's funny when people like I hear a lot of people say that like being in a zoo is better than being in the wild, but then also supporting animals being released into the wild. And it's like you can't really have your cake and eat it.
yeah. Yeah. Well, that brings me, I remember what I was going to say before. I was going to talk a bit about Minato.
Oh yeah,
Because, so for those that don't know, Minato is a zoo, I guess.
it's an open range
Technically,
zoo. That's what
it's
the
an
definition.
open range zoo in Adelaide, in the Adelaide Hills, and it's kind of known for being like, they've got huge kind of like, what's the word? Not paddocks, but enclosures, I guess. Like, it's just, they don't seem like enclosures because they're such huge like areas of land that the
Yeah,
animals get to be in. And I think as well, it's like meant to be more naturalistic because they've got different species in the same area. So I don't know, because I, like I said, haven't been there since I was being big, and so I don't really know what it looks like now. But um, they would have, gazelles with other, you know, maybe the giraffes and elephants, like they kind of all, is that right? I don't actually really know what animals they put together in the different areas.
Yeah,
They're
I'm not
still
sure.
obviously fenced off areas, but they're just meant to be really big and as naturalistic as possible. I'm assuming they don't put like tigers in or lions in with the gazelles and that
No,
kind of
I'm assuming not. Well, that's the thing. Like, what do you feed the lions?
yeah,
Other
yeah.
animals. Like,
Mm,
your speciesist. Sorry. Like, you're like, oh, like, I want these tigers to be in this open range. Well, you got to feed them.
mm,
So you're going to feed them the animals that you swore never to eat again, like cows, chickens, pigs, horses,
yeah,
ducks.
yeah.
Like, there's a little
So,
bit of a
but
contradiction there.
Minato, yeah, so I guess I think it's kind of similar to other zoos in the sense that some of the animals there, they don't need to be there from a conservation point of view. They're not endangered or anything. They're just there, you know, for people's entertainment because they do like safari type bus tours around Minato and that kind of thing. Um, but you know, but then they've also got conservation programs, and I think you know, whilst they do have large open ranges for some of the animals, I think from what I remember, some of the other animals are in smaller enclosures anyway. Like they've still got yeah some smaller enclosures, you know that you can. They've got the meerkat thing where you can go in and like interact with the meerkats and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
problem. Like, if it's big enough for them, then that's the wild. Like, you have to reduce their land to be able to see them because that's the whole point. Like, otherwise you're just back to square one, and you might as well just go to the wild and see them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's definitely still an entertainment point of view at
Yeah.
Monalto, but yeah, I guess the question, like the reason I brought it up, is because a lot of vegans, especially, like they love Monalto, like as a
Mm,
they think it's an ethical zoo, you know, because it is bigger.
mm,
And so I guess it comes down to the question of, you know, how big does the enclosure have to be
mm.
ethical because they're still enclosed, they're still in captivity, they're still dependent on humans to look after them, provide them with food, like they're not hunting their own food or anything like that. They still are it's all obviously still very controlled, so they are not able to be with like their families like they might have been in the wild. So like in the wild, for example, elephants often live in herds of like there could be hundreds of them or thousands even together.
Thousands. Oh my goodness, I might have to fact check
Maybe
that.
some herds of elephants, I don't know, but like, well, some herds might be small, some herds, but they're part of like you know a group. Whereas you know in somewhere like Monarto, they don't have that. So it's still a very controlled environment, just because the space, like, okay, of course, it's better to have more space for animals than less space for animals. But the fact that there is more space to me doesn't justify keeping them there
Yeah.
and using them. It's still seeing the animals as things to be used for whatever means we think are necessary and you know for entertainment and everything. So I think even a zoo like Minato that is open range is not for vegans. Vegans shouldn't be going there and supporting that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just like, yeah, they're kind of just pets, really.
Mm,
Yeah, it's kind of interesting as well. Like, yeah, I don't know, feeding animals to other animals, like, it's just bizarre as well. Like that whole thing. Like in
mm,
like at the Adelaide Zoo, there's literally the animals in the petting zoo that they would feed that same species of animal to the lions next door. Like, it's kind
mm,
of bizarre. Like, how did I don't know? It's like, yeah, it's like dogs. Like, people have to feed dogs other animals. It's just, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, like for someone to be able to keep a dog as a pet companion, like unless they're feeding the dog vegan food, which most
Yeah,
people don't, they have to feed other animals to that dog so that they can have that dog as a pet kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is weird. um, but yeah, so what do you think about Minato as well? At the same on the same page as me?
yeah, yeah. It's just the cage is bigger, but that doesn't change people's attitudes. It doesn't change that we're using them.
It's kind of it's kind of analogous to like free range farms. It's like
Yes,
sure,
still
it's better that like it's obviously better that animals have more space and that they're not in tiny cages. Like obviously
it's
when they're
welfare.
alive, you know, the cow like is going to have better well-being if they're in like a huge paddock as opposed to in a tiny
Mm,
metal cage. Um, but that doesn't really, it's kind of irrelevant. Like it's not, if you look at the reason that they're there in the first place
mm,
and the fact that they are being used as a resource and they're, still kept in captivity and, um, like they're still being seen as something to use for whatever we decide and not as an
yeah.
individual, not as an autonomous individual. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, like I always say this, like rights have to come first. Once you have rights established, then welfare is possible. So with your example of like larger cages, it's like the paradigm at the moment is cages are okay. We just have to have larger cages, and that's purely welfare. But if you looked at it from a rights point of view, like animals have the right to not be exploited and not be slaves. Okay, if they all had that right, and then there so happened to be an instance where it was necessary for us to step in, so maybe like catch and release, like there was an injured animal or an animal running on the road or something, we had to catch them and then release them. It's like while we've caught them, then we can consider their welfare, but they still have the rights that underpin that welfare that protect them. Whereas
Yeah.
at the moment, you're looking at welfare without any rights of protection. Like
Yeah.
an example is, I think had a look on a website. Had in Copenhagen, they had too many giraffes, so they just boom shot them.
Wait, in a
They
zoo
Yeah,
or
they bred too many giraffes, or like the gene pool was like there was a giraffe that was not valuable to the gene pool, and they just offed them. Like
yeah. So
zoos
they
kill
bred
animals all the time. Like
maybe they bred the giraffes but then couldn't sell them to like another zoo or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it makes like when you see like there was a like think of Blind Helen the cow from Freedom Hill. Like, do you not think that happens to other animals? Like when you have if they're breeding animals, like something's eventually going to go wrong, And then what do you do with that animal if they're no longer quote unquote valuable to the zoo?
Hmm.
Like you're just going to keep
Wow.
them
So
around.
they really just shot the giraffes, just got rid of them because
They just
didn't
don't
have
need them
they
anymore.
didn't have a use for them. Yeah. Yeah, that's the dark side of zoos that I think a
Yeah,
lot of people don't think about as well.
yeah, because they don't have the rights to protect them because they're only thinking about welfare without
Yeah,
any rights. It's like welfare does not work. Like welfare did not protect that giraffe from being killed.
yeah, that there's no
Never going.
real, yeah, you're right. Like without basic fundamental rights and respect for animals
Mm.
as individual autonomous beings, yeah, welfare can only go so far. It's only going to go as far as
We let
whatever
it.
we want to use that animal for. Yeah,
Exactly.
and it's the same in zoos, it's the same on farms. Welfare only matters until we decide that it matters, and if their purpose here is to, you know, be used for meat, be used for entertainment, la da da, we're only going to care about welfare as much as, um, we can, but still use that animal in that way. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if
that's
I
why.
explained that right, but yeah, hopefully people get what we're saying.
Yeah, I think I understand it. like the use of a lion is for a zoo. Like that's the purpose of a lion, is to like be this captured wild animal so that everyone can look at them in awe, you know. So we don't like, most people are against like trophy hunting and things like that for lions, because their purpose is like this, like it's symbolic, I suppose, maybe of the king of the jungle or something like that. But people have no problem going fishing and hunting fish, because like fish have a different purpose, and we just like pick and choose depending on what animal we get use out of.
Yeah, we definitely fetishize some species over others. Humans are very speciesist. We fetishize. We especially fetishize endangered animals as well,
Yeah,
like rhinos and things like that. It's like you kill a rhino and it's like a poacher, kills a rhino and it's like the end of the world. Like people go nuts. But
we
you
kill millions of
you
cows
kill a
every day.
cow and no one really gives a shit and people love it. But
Yeah,
yeah, so we definitely are very speciesist as humans. But yeah, I guess to summarize, we'll finish up the video now. But to summarize, it is our view on vegan education Adelaide.
well, the definition of vegan, sorry.
Yes, true. Yeah, it
More
really is.
factual than opinion.
Yeah, according to us and our, the definition of veganism about being anti-animal exploitation, zoos are exploitative towards animals. There's no way that you can deny that, right? They're exploitative towards animals, and we believe that it's not vegan to support zoos for that reason, and that the only conservation is important. We would agree with that, but not to the extent that we
Violate.
violate the rights of individuals. And we need to be focusing on other forms of conservation first and foremost, preserving animals in the wild, preserving natural habitat and that kind of thing first and foremost, not just keeping them in zoos so that they just live out their lives in captivity. That's not right. To me, that's not conservation. That's abuse. That's abusive.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're a vegan, hopefully, I don't know, you maybe watching this, whether I don't know what your attitude were coming into this video, but maybe you've got something to think about. Let us know. Comment on this video if you agree, if you disagree. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting topic, I suppose, but also a very sad one. Like zoos, just at the end of the day, zoos just make me really sad. I feel really sad for any animal that is in a zoo, even an open range zoo. I don't think that they're all that they're cracked up to be. I think there's a lot that animals are still missing out on when they're in an open range zoo. I think it's sad to have them there so that people can watch them and be like, oh cool, I saw a lion, and
Sorry, bro.
I think zoos are just really tragic and sad, and even if they, I mean, it's just to wrap up, but I know we're wrapping up, but that guy that I was saying in the Australia Vegans in Australia Facebook group, who said he donates to the zoo. It's kind of interesting because if you really thought that it was ethical to keep animals in zoos for conservation and you were okay with that and whatever, or you didn't like the fact that animals are in captivity but you think it's worth it for conservation, I guess that guy was kind of he's doing what he should be doing, which is donating money but not actually going there to gawk at the animals. It's that's probably the most, if you were a vegan and you were convinced that it was okay to exploit these animals for conservation, then you probably should just be donating and not actually going there, because going there, what's the point of that? You're just getting entertainment out of it, when you could just donate that money instead. You know what I'm saying?
Like it's added exploitation kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like,
Like there's layers of exploitation on top of other exploitation.
yeah, but I guess I'm just saying, yeah, like these vegans that these vegans that want to go to a zoo, that are trying to convince themselves it's okay
Yeah.
to go to the zoo because they have conservation programs and stuff. It's like, no, like if you were really a vegan, like you thought that what you should be doing is like just donating if you really cared about the conservation project, and not actually going to like see the animals,
Or just
because
donate to a conservation project.
because why would you want to see why would a vegan want to see animals trapped in cages? Like that's sad. Like I
Yeah.
feel like anyone that's like truly vegan at heart would not want to go to a zoo. Like, why would you want to go to an animal prison? Like,
Yeah.
that's not entertaining. That's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that was just an
Yeah.
afterthought. But yeah. So yeah, hope this video was interesting to anyone out there watching it. Let us know what you think. Leave a comment or something. And yeah, any closing thoughts, Mark?
Vegans don't use animals. Zoos use animals. So vegans don't go to the zoo.
Nice summary. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you again really soon.
Thanks, Keystone.
Probably next weekend. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
very quiet over there today, Keystone.
I think they said they're at work, maybe. So maybe just have us on in the
Oh, shit.
background. Yeah. All right. Bye,
See ya.
everyone.